Hi, everybody. I wanted to come on here for a little bit and just pretend that it was 2018 and people still give a damn about storytime YouTubers. Today, I'm going to be telling a story about this kid who I met in my freshman year of high school in my French 1 class. And I can't decide if he's my favorite or least favorite person that I've ever met. I'm going to give him a fake name. His name will be Sheldon. His name will be Sheldon. And this is basically a catalog of everything I saw him do. So, for starters, Sheldon was very disruptive in class. He would constantly interrupt the teacher to ask these questions that he totally already knew the answer to. Like, very simple questions. Like, for example, halfway through the semester, he would ask something like, what is I in French? Like, what is the pronoun I? I forgot how to say that. And maybe he did really forget, but it's more likely that he was just interrupting the class. Look, we were freshmen in high school, okay? We were not very mature, so the fact that he was just interrupting just for the sake of interrupting was not completely out of the question. And also, anytime our teacher would do anything nice to people other than Sheldon, or compliment anyone other than him, he would call her racist because Sheldon was black. Which is hilarious because there was another black kid in that class who the teacher liked because he was actually respectful and quiet and did his work. But, Sheldon ignored that because, it can't possibly be that I'm the problem. No, it's because you're racist, because I'm black. It can't possibly be that I'm just a bad student. He also, whenever he was having one of his little freakouts or disrupting the class, he would call himself the king of our classroom, and he would call the teacher his queen, and he would call us his court or his subjects. It was very uncomfortable. And so, because Sheldon started getting really bad on certain days where he was really particularly bad, the teacher would just send him out in the hall. Go out in the hall, think about what you've done, and I don't want to see you anymore. And then she would go out after 10 minutes and lecture him about why he was wrong, and then he would be allowed to come back in. And one particular day, he was, doing his normal thing, yelling, singing, asking ridiculous, superfluous questions. And our teacher eventually told him to leave and go out in the hallway. And he was about to close the door like he always did, but this time he kind of stood in the doorway. He would open the door, and then he stood in the doorway, and he just started ranting about how the teacher sucks, about how our class sucks, about how if our teacher was better, then he would if you were a better teacher, then maybe I wouldn't have to be so disruptive. Maybe I wouldn't have to make my own entertainment. When out of nowhere, this little 4'3" girl, this absolute heroine, stands up, and the doors in my school automatically lock if you close them all the way. So we have these magnetic buffers that you put between the door and the thing to keep them from locking. If you're in high school and in America, you probably know what I'm talking about. And this girl stands up and she takes the magnetic buffer out of the door frame, right? And she starts pulling the door closed because she doesn't want to hear talking. Or whoops, I accidentally just said his real name. I'm gonna have to edit that out in post because she doesn't want to hear Sheldon talk anymore. So Sheldon grabs onto the door and he starts pulling it open. And they have this 10-second long tug of war where they're just tugging on the door, and everyone's watching in the most awkward silence I've ever experienced in my life. And eventually, the girl manages to get the door closed, and it locks shut, and Sheldon puts his hands up to the glass, because there was glass next to the door, and he puts his hands up to the glass, and he shouts through the glass, "It's because I'm black!" So I feel like those first couple stories should give you an idea of what type of person Sheldon is. So one day in our class, we were going to have a day that coincides with another French holiday. I don't remember what it was, but we basically could sit around, eat a bunch of food, not really do anything, just kind of have a chill day, where we didn't really have to do any work. It was toward the end of the first semester, so it was really not a big deal. And it was just supposed to be a chill day. And on that day, Sheldon comes in with a friend of his. Side note, I have no idea how these two kids could possibly become friends because they were basically polar opposites of each other. But either way, this Sheldon's friend comes in with Sheldon, and Sheldon begins doing his thing, making a scene, stealing people's food from off their plates. We had this sort of a buffet style thing, but he was taking food from off of people's plates was very bizarre. And like spilling drinks and like sort of like getting up in people's like personal space and yelling a lot, like, all this sort of thing. And he eventually gets kicked out of the class by the teacher. And we thought that was going to be the end of him because at this point, he gotten kicked out of the class so much that sometimes he would just leave. Like, he would just leave the area and not come back. Like, we wouldn't see him again. And so we thought that was going to be the end of the time we see him. And so Sheldon's friend went with him. And after about 5 minutes, maybe, Sheldon comes back into the classroom, and he says to our teacher, he squeaks out this little apology like, "I'm sorry for all of my disruptions during this class, and I promise that I will be better in the future," and gives this long, melodramatic apology about how he's sorry, even though we can totally tell that his friend is making him say this, because before he started saying the apology, his friend sort of said, "Okay, go on, when he came in with his friend sort of said, "Go on, tell the teacher what you want to say." Like he was forcing Sheldon to apologize, like he was his therapist. It was the most embarrassing cringe I've ever seen in my life. You know that awful kind of embarrassing where like you're shifting from one foot to the other and your neck is itching because it's just so embarrassing, and like you're aware of your clothes like scraping up against your skin because you're just so aware of, you're just trying to get your mind off of anything but the situation at hand because it's just so painful. Like you just have to watch someone socially obliterate themselves. Yeah, it was like that. So I should probably have mentioned this before, but Sheldon had beef with a girl in the class. I'm gonna give her a fake name too. Her name will be Bree. And one day in class, we had a substitute teacher. That's gonna be a theme you're noticing throughout this video because, at this point, the teacher was so fed up with Sheldon's bullcrap that, the only way he could get away with stuff anymore is if there was a substitute, because the substitute didn't know how bad he was. And this one class, we had a substitute, and Sheldon and Bree got into an argument where they were trading insults. I don't know why these two kids hate each other so much. I think it's because Bree just constantly makes fun of him. I'm not going to lie. I think Bree was the instigator in this situation. And she would constantly make fun of him because she was taller than him, and she's a girl. And I guess she thought that was funny. Again, we're freshmen in high school. So these two were just exchanging insults back and forth to each other constantly, with Bree saying stuff like, "I'm taller than you, and I'm a girl. You're ugly. You look like a Neanderthal." And Sheldon would say stuff like, "Who are you to call me ugly? You look like Rango. I'm going to make a diss track on you." And Sheldon decides to drag a completely unrelated girl into the mix. He points at a completely unrelated girl who is not part of the argument. Just the sweetest little girl I've ever met in my life. And, well, not that I've ever met in my life, but like the sweetest little girl you can imagine. And he points at her and says, "At least I'm not as ugly as her. She looks genetically modified." And then he points to another girl who was kind of involved in the argument, but also not really, who was, a bit on the heavier side. And he points to her and he says, "Are we not going to talk about the fact that your chin is connected to your neck?" And then later on in the semester, in another argument, Bree brings up the diss track that Sheldon was allegedly supposed to make, and she says something along the lines of, "Let's hear your diss track. You said you were going to make a diss track on me, right? Let's hear your diss track." And Sheldon pulls it up on his phone. I don't know the name of the diss track, so don't ask. And he starts playing it, his diss track against Bree. And look, it's admirable that you want to start a rap career, right? But when you're listening to a song, like a rap song, and it's almost good, but not quite, like, it's very close to being good, but there's just some element about it that's missing, that's just not there, that's just barely holding it back from being good. Yeah, it wasn't even like that. It was just straight up awful. Imagine someone who copied Gucci Gang, like Lil Pump's Gucci Gang, like they kind of copied that style into their song on accident. Like, they didn't mean to copy Lil Pump, it's just what happened. And mix that with the most superfluous auto-tune I've ever heard, maybe ever. It literally sounded like R2-D2 talking trash in his native language. So, another story. I think we're maybe a little under halfway through every story I have. So, one time, a new girl comes into class. She wasn't in our normal class, and she She had never shown up prior or since that day, so I don't know what she was doing there, but I mean, the teacher was fine with it, so I guess I didn't care. I think she was like making up a test or something. But no, this was just because the teacher was okay with it does not mean that Sheldon was going to be okay with it, because Sheldon was definitely not okay with it. And he keeps running his mouth about how, you're not in this class, you're not in this class, get out, nobody wants you here. Like, what is she doing here? Teacher, what are you doing? Allowing her to be in this class. Like, she doesn't belong here. She's not in our class. And our teacher tells him, basically politely tells him to shut up because he doesn't know what he's talking about, but he just keeps talking like, you're not in this class, get out, over and over again. And at one point, our teacher tells him to go out in the hall. And when he walks to go out the hall, he doesn't walk directly to the door, but he kind of takes a circular path where he goes behind the girl. And when he's behind the girl, he sort of jumps up and down into the air and silently mouthing the words, 4 eyes, because this girl wore glasses. And so when he gets to the doorway, he stands in the doorway and he talks about how much he loves his teacher and all of us are his minions, just standard Sheldon stuff. When the teacher takes the magnetic buffer out of the door and shuts it, and Sheldon only manages to get the words, bro, stop, out before he's locked out of our classroom. Another time, okay. I'm sorry. I'm really sorry. I have like a script that I'm going off, like not an exact script, but like a set of notes that I'm kind of going off of, and I'm not keeping it together, dude. So this is the worst thing that Sheldon did. One time, our teacher was teaching French. I think we were learning about verb conjugation, and Sheldon took off his shoes and then took off his socks. So he was now barefoot in class. And, if it were literally any other person doing this, I would not have... I guess I would have reacted more strongly, but because it was Sheldon and he was such a character at this point, I guess I thought that anything he could do wouldn't really surprise me. So I consciously took a note of it, but I didn't really care until he took out a nail clipper and started clipping his toenails in class. Keep in mind, he sat like at the front of the class, so everybody could see him doing this. And he was clipping his nails in class while the teacher was talking, and then proceeded to take the clippings into his hand and throw them at the girls in the class that he liked. So, yeah, that was probably the most surreal moment of my life. Another time, I know this story so far is basically just a pointless sequence of non sequiturs, but I really don't know how to connect anything together because I just don't know how else to comment on this kid. I have more stories though. One time, I just said his real name again. Sheldon was spouting more garbage about how he's the king and, how we're all his subjects. And I was wearing gloves at the time because it was winter. And he yells and he points at me and he says, I own all of you, even him with the gloves. And the other kid, the other only black kid in the class who I mentioned previously, said, I don't think you own anyone, Sheldon. And Sheldon yells back, hey, you're black, I own you too. I hope no one takes that out of context. And everyone sort of reacted like, whoa, dude, you can't say that. But again, Sheldon was black, so he didn't really get any trouble. Which, I guess, I don't know how fair that is. Like, can you get in trouble for racist remarks against your own race? I don't know. Another time, everyone was sort of in an argument, and Sheldon couldn't really get a word in edgewise, so he sort of stood up, like, onto the table, like, onto his desk, and he yelled, everyone shut up! You all must respect me! I'm your king! I am the alpha! Like that... And then he just sat back down. Like, he was trying to get a word in, like, he was saying shut up to everyone, because he was trying to get a word in, but then he just sat back down and didn't say anything. So I don't know. And at this point, I had sort of begun to realize what a character Sheldon was, and I decided subconsciously to start... This is my freshman year of high school a couple of years ago, so the term rage bait wasn't really popular back then, but I was basically just going to start rage baiting this kid. And, again, freshman in high school, I wasn't the most mature person ever, and, maybe if I could go back in time and do things differently, maybe I would have done stuff differently. But, I really don't know. That's up to you, I guess. And one time, Sheldon was twerking in front of two girls. He was doing something called the thug shake. I don't know what that means, and I don't care enough to look it up, but he was basically twerking in front of these two girls. And I turned around and I saw Sheldon twerking in front of these two girls, and I simply called out, "Hey, let me get a view." And Sheldon looked at me and he started freaking out. Like, dude, did you hear what this kid just said? Like, he started talking to the teacher, like, dude, did you hear what this kid just said? He just said, "Let me get a view." And then he started acting like I was the weird one, which I guess in this situation I was the weird one, but he was weirder for twerking in front of two girls. Like, he was worse in this scenario. Another time, here's another. Oh, this one is particularly bad. One time, Sheldon was in class and he was learning to play chess from one of his friends. Like, this was back when chess.com was like still super popular. And he was on the football team. Sheldon was on the football team for our school. And I guess I should say he is, because he still goes there. And our security guard stops by the room and he says, "Hey, I need to see Sheldon." And Sheldon stands up and he says, "Did I do something wrong?" And the security guard says, "I don't know, you tell me." And then the door opens a little wider and it reveals our school's football coach, who pulls Sheldon, oh my gosh, I keep doing that, into the hallway. And he was gone for about 20 minutes. He eventually came back and he got in. I didn't really figure out what happened to him conclusively, but allegedly he got in trouble for basically sexually harassing one of his teachers, not our teacher, and saying things about her being his queen, repeatedly touching her arms, and making lewd comments about her breasts. Allegedly. So, here's one that I didn't write down on my script. One time, I went out in the hall because I had to record stuff. Sometimes we have to record stuff for French, like saying sentences to prove that we could, pronounce certain words. And I went out in the hall and I saw Sheldon coming toward me, and I just raised my arm and I said, "Hey, Sheldon," and he hissed at me like a feral cat, like like that. And I just did not care at this point, dude, because this kid was such a character. Like, anything he could have done to me at that point, I just did not care. So I go outside, I record my French stuff, and I come back in, and I just say, kind of on a whim, "Hey, Sheldon, why did you hiss at me?" And then Sheldon points at me, and he says, "It's him, that's the guy." Like he was accusing me of being a witch in the 17th century. And the teacher proceeds to basically explain that Sheldon had come in, and he had alleged that I actually was the one to hiss at him, and then he proceeded to bark at me in order to assert his dominance over me and put me in my place. And for some inexplicable reason, some of the people in my class actually didn't believe me, like when I told the truth, like as if they would have any reason to believe that Sheldon wasn't a feral animal who was willing to hiss at people. All right, last story. This is the second to last day of school, and our teacher had us moving these really heavy boxes, and they were heavy because they were full of French textbooks, and we had to move them from the teacher's lounge to like a storage room that was sort of far off in the school. Like, it wasn't like, it was like in the school, but it was like really, you know what I mean, right? Like, it was really far away from everything else. And the whole time, Sheldon kept talking to me, saying stuff like, "Hey," and then he would say my name, like, "Hey, let me get some of that." And he was like rubbing his hands together and his eyes were all wide like a psychopath. And he kept kind of pushing me into like a corner, like trying to push me into a corner. You know when someone isn't like pushing you like with their hands, but they're sort of approaching you at a steady pace and not slowing down, and they're sort of like backing you up into a wall. He kept trying to do that, and I was genuinely starting to get scared of this kid. Until we had to actually, start doing the work. And the boxes were extremely heavy, so Sheldon was carrying a relatively light one, and two girls who were carrying one box together, so I don't know what room they had to be talking trash. They were like making fun of him, like basically calling him a little girl for lifting a light box. And like, to be fair, these boxes were very heavy, so I don't really agree with that. Plus, it took two of them to lift one, so I don't know where they get off like telling him that he's weak. Either way. And I had to carry a heavier box too, but I was like pushing it on the floor. Like, I wasn't carrying it, I was sort of pushing it on the carpet floor. So, and during the journey, Sheldon accidentally, I'm doing air quotes right now, you can't see it, accidentally drops one of the books from his box onto the floor. And he says, "Oops, I didn't mean to do that. Let me get that now." And he bent over in a way where he was basically shoving his ass right in my face. It was very uncomfortable, and everybody kind of noticed it, but they didn't really say anything because it's Sheldon, okay? It's Sheldon. Anyway, we finished delivering the boxes, and we came back to the class, and yeah, that's basically all the stories I have of this kid. I wish I had a story to tell for the last day of school, but he was not there. I think he had like some family issues. I don't remember. Um, I genuinely don't know what was wrong with this kid. I know that sounds mean when I put it like that, but I don't know what this kid's problem was. I don't know if he thought it was like funny, if it was like a joke that went too far. I don't know if he had some sort of defiance disorder. My personal theory is that he just didn't get enough attention at home. So yeah, that's basically it. Sheldon, if you're watching this, you know who you are. You know what your real name is. And yeah, I honestly don't know what's wrong with you, and I'm genuinely interested to see where you will go in life. Um, yeah, that's basically it. I know this was a different videos from some of my previous videos. I'm still kind of figuring it all out. I have a couple other quite a few other stories that I could tell. I have a story about how I almost got involved in a gang fight on my school bus. I have another story about this girl in my debate class who desecrated her dad's ashes in front of me for no reason. So yeah, maybe I'll tell some of those on this channel. But until then, that's basically it. Yeah, have a good day. See ya.